Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a premier field engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's session will be focused on policy sets and guided scenarios that are part of Intune, which is part of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So we'll start with policy sets, and specifically where I want to go with this is similar to other sessions. What are policy sets, why we care about them in Intune, and then digging into policy sets a bit in terms of the requirements, talking about how they work, configuring them, and then monitoring. End up with a couple of troubleshooting tips and tricks. Now, one thing about this session is that really I'm just going to show you some high-level capabilities because there's nothing really complex here, but I think they're really interesting in the kind of things that they will enable for us to do. So not digging deeply into the level 300, 400 stuff in this session, more staying around the 100 level, but interesting stuff nonetheless. So what are policy sets? Well, so policy sets are going to enable you to effectively take objects that you've already defined and put them together in what's called a, quote, collection of settings. So these are definitely not config manager collections, but they're settings that kind of are tied together and work together, as you'll see as we go along. So don't confuse collections with config manager. They aren't. Policy sets allow you to group objects together. Now, what do I mean by that? So there are configurations in Intune that we refer to as objects. They would be things like app configurations, app deployments, configuration profiles, compliance policy, things like that. All of those are objects. And so you can take objects that need to be assigned together and group them into a policy set. So essentially, this policy set grouping is going to allow you to build a strategy for common device user settings. So a little tangent on that. So you'll hear people talk about, hey, with Intune, you need to deploy everything to users. And you'll hear others say, no, it's devices. And the answer really is that it's both. There are some settings that need to go to users. There are some settings that need to go to devices. And so as you think about grouping your objects, think about where do these actually need to be targeted? Are these user settings? Are these device settings? And perhaps you have a couple of different policy sets, one for users, one for devices, right? Also, with policy sets, we do support using them cross-platform. What does that mean? Well, so if you have a policy set that has 3 settings for Windows and 5 settings for iOS and 2 settings for Android, and you're on an Android device, you're only going to get the 2 settings that apply to you. The rest of them will be processed and flagged as not applicable, right? Now, while that's an awesome capability that we have, and it's really good to know that we can do that, I'm kind of in the mindset of trying to keep things siloed by OS. In other words, if I'm going to build a policy set, I'm going to do it factoring in my devices and users. So I might have a tier 0, I'll call it tier 0, policy set for my Windows devices, a tier 0 for my Windows users, and then I might have a tier 1, which is applied after tier 0 and group it the same way, tier 2, kind of like that, and then apply them to the right groups to kind of get the ordering of when those apply kind of deal. That's a bigger discussion than we have time for here, but that's my way that I would probably do it. I don't like the idea of putting settings for an OS that I'm not targeting into a policy set that will just need to be filtered and ignored, right? Kind of a pet peeve of mine, honestly. It works and it works well, so that's great. But I wouldn't do it that way. These policy sets will allow you to define a baseline. So if you want to have a consistency about how all of your devices are configured and what goes down where and things like that, then you can absolutely do that with policy sets. And then layer on the things that are in common, do things separate from the policy sets for those things that are unique, and so on. Essentially, think of it as assigning your organization's minimum configuration, right? And then we have the list of those management objects that are supported. So we started talking about the objects and what they were. Not all objects in Intune are currently supported for policy sets. These are the ones that are. So apps, app configuration profiles, app configuration policies, device configuration policies, app protection policies, and so on, right? There's some things that aren't supported, but these are, and you can get a lot of mileage out of just these. Others may come as we go along, but those are the ones that are supported today. So why policy sets? Well, I already mentioned some of the reasons. We'll mention them again. So being able to organize group settings that need to be applied together into a single policy set, deploy those down. Optimizing your deployment. So before policy sets, you would have all these objects. They would be configured. You would need to deploy them to the environment. You could, but for every object, you would need a unique deployment. That's not true with policy sets. You can group these configured objects together into a policy set, deploy the policy set as one, and then you're good to go, right? And then be able to prioritize your deployments. Again, by leveraging policy sets and using effective Azure AD group strategy, you can layer on these settings in this policy set go first, these next settings go second, these next settings go third, right? Now, within a policy set, there still is no ordering of operation. If you have 5 objects in a policy set, the fifth one could go first one time, and the first one could go first the next time, and so on, right? It's just objects that you want to apply together. So what are the requirements for a policy set? Well, the only real requirement for a policy set is that the objects you're going to deploy have to be created before you create your policy set. So if you're going to put apps in your policy set along with configuration profiles in your policy set, you have to have the app object created and the configuration policy or profile, whatever I said, created before you actually send that down, right? Okay. So how does this really work? So before policy sets, we might have multiple objects, and we would have to do individual deployments. They would all get down to the device, no problem, right? But with policy sets, now we take these same objects, we group them into a single container known as the policy set, deploy them one time, and they go down to the device. So again, it's a structure that it's just really a container, but it's just a convenient way to manage these in your environment. Okay, so the easiest way to go do this is to see the policy set. So let me pull in the device management console. So here is my device management console, if the mouse will work. And so to get to policy sets, I'm just going to go down to devices and then scroll on down to policy sets. I've got one created. We'll kind of go through the wizard ourselves and create a new one. But basically, we'll start on the overview page. So if this is your first time to look at policy sets, you're going to get a pop-up that says, I don't even know what it said because I bypassed it. And once you bypass it once for a user, it doesn't come up again. But what can I use policy sets for? What can be included in policy sets? And then you can go into policy sets and go define one. I've got one created here. I'll just go create one. And so this is a wizard that will walk you through. So I'll just call this blah for now and scroll down, right? And so as we go along here, come on, there. As we go along here, we have review and create. We can jump directly to that, or we can just follow through on the wizard and go to application management. So as you see, as you define the policy set, there's 3 configuration areas, really 4, but 3 main ones: application management, device management, and device enrollment that you can manage. So here's where I can go choose all my apps, and I think this is too big. Nope, that's 100% good. Looked a little bit too big. So I'm going to go select my app. So this assumes, again, that you have these already configured. So I'm going to go select my apps. I'm just going to pick a couple. No particular order there. That was an interesting one because we don't actually support Office 365 right now, but it's there anyway. So I just hit OK. All right. Now notice whenever I do this, each one of these has a different additional configuration available. Now, if I click on all 3 of these, they're all going to be the same. But if I click on it over here, I'm going to get to choose the assignment type that I want for the individual app. And if I need a VPN connection to be able to run the app, then I have the ability to select it here so that when that app fires up, it's associated with a VPN, that VPN connection is fired up if it's not there, and so on. And then I can choose how I want to treat this app when the device is removed from management, whether I want to uninstall it or not, right? So again, I can do that for all of these apps. Now let me close this manually. So there's 3 apps. Now I also have choices here for app configuration policies and app protection policies. So to be clear, the app configuration policies, any application that will accept configuration policies, then we would be able to define those configuration policies in advance, and these are the ones that would show up. All right, so I'll just choose it, add it to the list. And then app protection policies. These are MAM policies, or Windows Information Protection policies, if you will. All right, I can add it. Now, what you're going to see me do as I go through this is add a setting for every single question that's being asked, right? You don't have to do that. You can add only the sections that make sense. If you want a policy set that is all about applications, then just go forward past the next ones and don't configure anything. But you're going to see me do that, right? So again, you're up to you how you end up doing it. So now device management. Well, so under device management, I have 2 things. I have device configuration profiles, device compliance policy. Little word about this, but just a little short tangent, because sometimes people still get confused about this. The way I understand these and the way I explain these is device compliance policies are all about checking a device. There's no configuration that's done on that device. Whereas device configuration policies, hey, it has configuration in the name, so you know it's going to be about configuration. One other thing here. If you're doing device compliance, right, and this isn't about policy sets, it's just device compliance in general, then this is where you would be able to say, is this device compliant with the things that we require this device to be compliant with in order to be used, right, in order to gain access, maybe a conditional access policy, whatever. One of the tie-ins in a co-managed world is you can actually refer to config manager and say, hey, config manager, is this device compliant with your rules as well as Intune's rules, and mix the 2 together, which comes into a very powerful ability to assess compliance, right? So I'll just pick a couple. So I've got configuration profile here. I've got this one. I've got this one. I'll just pick 2 either way, right? And then here I have a device compliance policy. I'll just pick one and move on, right? And so you see there's no additional configuration I can do here. I just choose it and move on. So now I'll go to device enrollment. So device enrollment, I have a few options. The first one is device type restrictions. Well, in order to show you this, let me launch another instance of the device management console. So go to the end. So there are some settings, specifically device management types here. Let's see. Device type restrictions. That's what I was trying to say. So let me go down to enroll devices and then device type restrictions or enrollment restrictions is here. So what you'll notice is that I have a default device type restriction, and then I have one that I created custom. Why do I show you that? Because if you go into device type restrictions here, you're only going to see the one that I've created myself. You're not going to see the default one. Why don't you see the default one? Well, because it's default. You don't have to deploy it. It's already there. It is the default, right? So if you want to do something other than the default, then you can put it into your policy set, right? And then we can go down. We can do Windows Autopilot deployment profiles. Pick whatever I want from there. I'll just pick the top one. And then finally, enrollment status page. So like device type restrictions, there is a default enrollment status page. You don't see it here. You only see the one that I've customized. So I'll choose that and move on. And so once I've done that, I've got everything that I need. Now you do see in some cases the priority columns and different things, right? That I can go configure, but I only have one enrollment status page here. So I'll go on to scope tags. So scope tags now is out we're not really configuring anything. So I'm not going to go into scope tags, right? That's another discussion. But effectively, scope tags is the equivalent of role-based access for Intune. More discussion around that, but that's what it is. So if you wanted to assign a scope tag to this policy set, then you could do that and apply it down to devices that are associated with that scope tag and different things, right? Users, whatever. So again, just a brief mention, scope tags will be another session. And then finally, once I have all this done, I can go through and assign things. So the assigning is interesting. Talked about that a bit when we started this. You'll hear a lot of people that want to assign everything to users, but there's still a valid set of reasons to assign things to devices. The point of this is you might want to do a policy set for the user settings. You might want to do a policy set for the device settings. And when you come in here, it might be tempting to you to choose all users or all devices. Definitely don't recommend that in a production environment. It's kind of the equivalent of deploying something to all systems in a config manager environment. Possible, but not recommended. But in a policy set, there are some things that you can't deploy to all users or all devices. So if you choose that, it'll warn you and say, hey, these settings can't be deployed. So I'm going to have to go back to my select group and then go choose my group that I want to deploy to. I'll just pick my first one because it doesn't matter for my demo here. And then if I want to exclude any groups I can finally create this and save it off. And we are good, right? Now, I'm going to go review it and create. I'm not going to actually save it, but here it gives you a chance to review the whole thing, see what you've done, make sure this is what you want, and then finally create it, right? Again, I'm not creating it because I've already got one, and that's really what I wanted to show you about it. So let me go ahead and close this extra one, pull Intune out of the way, and move on. So in terms of object deployment, or in terms of monitoring, the only thing I put here is that we have to deal with the object deployment stuff. So I said that very poorly. So another way of saying that is you are going to create the objects before you do the policy set. And because you've created the objects, if you want to see what's going on with that object, you go back to that object directly and look at the monitoring that's associated with that object. So if it's an app, there's certain ways to look at the app stuff. If it's a configuration profile, there's ways to look at that are different from apps and so on, right? So use the inherent nature of the object you're deploying to see that. And then finally, some tips and tricks in terms of troubleshooting. Again, it's kind of standard per the object that you're actually deploying, the options that you will have. The tips and tricks, I mentioned the default objects, so don't be alarmed that you don't see the default objects in the console when you're creating the policy set for the reasons I stated. There are several known issues around policy set that we have documented in the default documentation that talks about Intune and policy sets. Things like scoped admins and how there can be a little kind of glitch in the wizard that you have to go forward and go back and then go forward again if you're using an admin that is assigned to scope. Some little things about the enrollment status page, some man policy types. We talked through the object types that are available in Intune but are not yet supported for policy sets, and I'll list them here on the screen. Right? So that's policy sets. Right? Well, kind of hand in hand in some ways, not in others, we have the next topic, which is guided scenarios. So for guided scenarios, same kind of thing. Just want to talk about what they are, why we care about them, show them to you a little bit, and then we will end up the session. So what are guided scenarios? Well, effectively, guided scenarios enable you as the admin to see the complete end-to-end process of configuring something, right? So largely, this is going to be for folks that are very, very light on experience with Intune and want to understand the pieces in Intune that need to be factored in when creating a given deployment, right? They're good absolutely to know about, to learn about, to see, to make sure, maybe vet your knowledge, what you're doing against what the policy set says, right? But they're guided experiences. It's a wizard. They're a wizard that will pull together the various elements that are needed to accomplish a task, right? the guided experiences will actually end up creating a policy set, right? In some cases, I haven't checked all of them. I know the last one we're going to talk about will. I'm going to try to visually remember to check the others as I go through this, but they will create policy sets, which is why I'm covering it in conjunction with policy sets. Right now, there are 3 scenarios that we'll walk through for the guided scenario that you can see. And just know right now, as of this recording, guided scenarios is a preview function. So I won't be surprised if there's changes to it before it goes into full production release. But it's pretty cool, right now. Okay. So why guided scenarios? Well, accelerated learning. If you're new to Intune, like I mentioned, it might be confusing to know what goes where and how to tie things together. These guided scenarios really help with that. Now, there's configurations that can be pretty simple to do. There's configurations that can be pretty complex to do. I kind of think of this in terms of the wizards with Config Manager. So if you're going in, I'll use application model for example. If you're going into Config Manager and configuring an application in the application model, the wizard that you navigate through is really basic. It'll give you a functioning application, but it's pretty dang basic. If you want to take advantage of some of the enhanced features of the application model, you go into the application once it's created and go configure those, right? So the wizard's a shortcut for basic stuff. That's kind of roughly equivalent to guided scenarios. There's some complex stuff you can do. That's not the point of guided scenarios. It's for showing you how to work through some, pretty simple stuff. That said, let's go look. So I'm going to pull back in my console, Intune console, and now I'm going to go down to, it's off the screen, just right here. I'll click on it, Troubleshooting, and then you'll see guided scenarios. So I'm not going to save anything here, but I will show you. Actually, I think I lied to you a minute ago. I didn't mean to. This is where you would see the pop-up. The other one you won't. This is where you would see the pop-up if this is the first time your user comes in here. I've already been in here, so mine's gone. But there's these 3 scenarios, right? And so basically, let's walk through them. So each one of them comes with a wizard, tells you what you're going to do. I'm going to start these. I'm not going to configure anything. I just want to show them to you. So it says 15 minutes to configure. That's overkill, I think, if you already have the objects. But if you're new to this, absolutely, you're reading things here. It will maybe take you close to 15 minutes. So it talks about the benefit, the impact, what you need to continue for the Office apps, and so on. So I'm going to click Next. Now the basics. So I'm just going to call this demo as the prefix, and then it's going to tell you, hey, as we go through this, we're going to go create an iOS app protection policy. We're going to create an Android app protection policy. We're going to create a default app or Edge app configuration, right? And so this is Microsoft Office mobile apps, but this is what we're saying are going to be created, right? Okay, this one I don't know that I saw that before, but either way, it's part of it. So I'm going to click Next here. So the next thing that I have is a list of the included policy managed apps. Now, I can go select other apps if I want to. I can interact, with these or at least look at these, right? This is what's going to be configured, so I get to review the list. And once I'm good with it, I'll just click Next in the wizard. And then finally, this is where you will set up your app protection settings. So there's a whole different session that we did on app protection in Intune with iOS and Android. So go look at that if you want to brush up on that. But here's where you go set those settings, configure them the way you like, click Next. And then finally, assigning. So you're going to assign this to a group and then click Next, and you get the chance to review what you did, right? So this weaves together, shows you what you did. You'll see, so I don't see in this where this creates a policy set. I'll show you in the other one as we come up where it does, right? So, but this is deploying Office. So if I go back, let's go look at one of the others. So let's do Edge for mobile. So I'll click Start. Again, what's the benefit? What you will need to continue. go in and give it a demo as the name. Go on through. This is going to tell you what we're going to create. So Edge iOS app, Edge Android app, and the app configuration for this. Right. So I'm going to click next. So this is where you do the configuration, your home page, all the different things that you care about with Edge. I'm not going to put anything here. I'm going to click next. And this is where you go actually do the assignment and click next. Now, you notice that I didn't have to go through and do some of the things, some of the basic configuration I did. But if I go back to basics, it tells me it's going to configure the app. Well, it knows how to do that, and so it's going to go configure that as part of it. I just had to fill in the detail for the app configuration, right? Okay, so let's go back to assignments. I'm going to click through and just click next to make sure and look at this again, and that's it, right? All good. So I can go from there. Now, let's go do the third one. So try out a cloud managed PC. So this is where you might want to build a simple cloud managed only PC just to show what can be done. So that's what you're going to do with the wizard. Again, walk you through what you're going to need to continue. Now, I'm going to have to select a user to be able to continue. So I'll just choose myself. That's me. Oops, that's me. Hit OK. And then next. And then I'm going to have to choose a device. So the first option, the best option, is to use autopilot. I don't have any autopilot profiles in here, so I don't have anything, or devices configured with the autopilot profile don't have anything to choose from. Or I can just say, hey, the user is going to manually enroll their device. Cool. And then finally, review and deploy. And so let's scroll down. What happens when I click deploy? Well, here's a list of the configurations that will actually be made. And notice, here's where I see policy set. Didn't see it on the other two. Here I do. Right? And I can go forward and click OK. So that's the guided scenarios. It is in preview, and so it may very well, probably will change as it goes from preview to production, and we'll see what happens. But I wanted to show it to you because I think it's interesting, right? So in terms of troubleshooting, again, standard troubleshooting for the objects that are created. In terms of tips and tricks, definitely would suggest test driving these, understand what's going on with it. And then stay tuned. Again, preview feature, some changes coming probably that aren't there yet. And there you go. All right, so that's really quick. Told you it wouldn't be really detailed, but I think useful information for policy sets and the guided, the guided scenario. Sorry, I was drawing a blank on that. Anyway, so that's policy sets, guided scenarios. Wanted to show it to you. That's all we will do here. So I will end it now, and we will see you next time.